When I was 16 years old, which feels like it was a lot longer than it used to. But when I was 16, I felt like I had a lot of things going on in my life. There was just a bunch of stuff taking place, it felt like. It was kind of a chaotic, hectic time in a person's life. I had gotten my driver's license that year, and I was driving around my very first car, a 1990 Chevy Lumina. It had 180,000 miles on it when I got it, so it didn't drive much longer. But it was kind of my first taste of independence, and I loved that about that. At 16, I was still navigating the world, the horrendous world that is teenage dating, which was proving to be a rather unsuccessful venture for me. And I had a lot of things going on. I was trying to figure out what were the next steps in my life because I had that realization that, hey, college is a lot closer than what it used to be, and I needed to know what was next, my next few steps were. I felt like I was dealing with a lot of different stuff. As a 16-year-old, you're kind of absorbed into the world of teenage drama. As an adult, we can all look back and go, well, that was silly. But at 16, that's your whole world. That is everything to you. And so there were a lot of ups and downs and trials and tribulations, but overall, looking back, I can say at 16, my world was fine. It was fine. I certainly wasn't having to face down cancer treatments on top of everything else that high school has to offer. But that was something that was going on in the life of a young woman named Emma. At 16 years old, in the summer of 2015, Emma was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. She had noticed that she was a lot more fatigued than normal. She was dealing with some weight fluctuations in her life, and she was dealing with a lot of mood swings, or at least more noticeable mood swings than the standard 16-year-old girl. And so she went to the doctor and told him what was going on, and as he was feeling around, he noticed a bump on her neck. And they took it in for a biopsy, and she was diagnosed with papillary thyroid cancer at 16 years old. All of a sudden, the problems of college visits and prom dates seemed like small potatoes. As you can imagine, Emma was rather scared walking through this. She had no idea what this meant. Anytime we hear the word cancer, we start to hear. But at 16 years old, to have that happen at such a young age, it felt overwhelming for her. That world of college visits and prom dates was being turned to doctor's appointments and surgeries. And she was having to walk through a world that she was not quite ready for. And as scary as that prospect really was for her, at the very least, Emma did not have to walk that road alone. They were with her through everything, but she had another person who was there for all the surgeries and doctor's appointments and would come to visit her in her home, and that was her best friend, Margaret. Emma and Margaret had been best friends since the 7th grade. They had walked through a lot of that teenage drama together, but Margaret resolved that because her friend was going through the worst moment of her life, she was not going to abandon her. So as often as Margaret could get away to go and see her friend and spend some time with her, that's exactly what she did. Emma remarked at how much that really meant to her because it meant that there was somebody in her life who was actively trying to make her feel the one thing that she wanted to feel, normal. Margaret did everything that she could to spend time with her, to just joke around with her, and to keep her up on all the important things of high school, not just bringing her homework, but to share with her who was dating who and what's the scuttlebutt and the drama going on behind the scenes. The really important stuff of high school. Margaret was somebody that Emma could lean on, and she remarked at how much that meant to her to have Margaret care enough about her to walk through that with her. Little did the two of them know that Margaret was going to be walking with her in a much more tangible way. 7 months after Emma's diagnosis, Margaret herself was also diagnosed with papillary cancer. A year beforehand, the two of them sat next to each other for football games and went together to school dances. Now they were sitting next to each other in hospital waiting rooms and going with each other on doctor's appointments. The two of them kind of learned to lean on each other in this time, though. Emma wasn't going to abandon Margaret because Margaret hadn't abandoned Emma. And so the two of them kind of became a support system. They were able to walk with each other to these various appointments, but also to make sure that the other was taking their medicine the way they were supposed to. They were able to lean on each other and vent their frustrations of having to walk through this horrible thing at such a young age. They were also able there to kind of help pick up the slack when the other one didn't feel quite up to snuff. The two of them just kind of became, they were tight-knit before the cancer treatments ever took place. Now they were inseparable. And even as both of them entered into remission, that same connection, the same bond that strengthened itself through their cancer treatments remained. They would finish out their high school career together. They went off to the same college together. They competed in marathons together. They even travel around together to this very day. Again, they were already tight-knit together, but this facing a cancer didn't just strengthen their friendship, it created an unbreakable bond to the point that Emma said, "We were best friends beforehand, now we are besties for life." If there's one constant thing to the whole of the human experience, it is that life will constantly throw things at you that you did not expect, and more often than not, did not want. Every person faces hardship. The only thing that's different in that hardship is the amount that we face and the packaging that hardship comes in. But all of us will face hardships in our lives. If somehow you are somebody who can think, well, I haven't faced too much hardship in my life, then let me tell you one thing, it's coming. It's a constant. It is a fact of life. It is something that each one of us go through. And just because we proclaim the name of Jesus, just because we strive to follow after him in our lives, and just because we try to model ourselves after his teaching, it does not mean that we are somehow immune to facing hardship. If somebody told you at one point in time that just because you're a Christian, it meant that you were never going to face hardship, then please, and I mean this as sincerely as I can, I'm sorry. But they lied to you. Because Jesus himself would tell us in Matthew chapter 5, verse 45, at the tail end of it, he says, "For he makes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the just and on the unjust." Every living person will face hardship throughout their lives simply because we had the audacity to be born. But as difficult as the burden of those hardships can be, and please make no mistake, they can be incredibly burdensome to every single one of us, the load can be made lesser when you have someone walking through it with you. Having someone come alongside of you and care about you and just make sure that you're doing okay through the midst of all of that can make what is a very burdensome time in our life feel just a little bit lighter. Having people who care beyond you whenever things are going well in your life, but who are willing to walk through you in the nitty-gritty of the hardships and the trials and the tribulations that we all face, I don't think that we can ever put a price on how much that means to us. It's been said that you don't really know who your friends are until life punches you in the face, and then you look around to see who's helping you back up. Because the reality is that the people who mean the most to us are often the ones who walk through pain with us, who don't abandon us whenever life gets difficult. Whether that hardship is something that was unforeseen or a hardship that, let's be honest, we brought on ourselves. All of us are going to face hardships, and we need people in our lives who are willing to walk beside us through those hardships and get through that adversity with us. And oftentimes what ends up happening is once we get on the other side of that hardship, when life sort of levels back out for us a little bit, what was already a strong bond between two people can become unbreakable. To the point that the next time we walk through hardship, because life likes to keep giving that to us, they're oftentimes the first person we call. Or if they're walking through hardship of their own, we're willing to be there for them, no questions asked, because they were there for us. We need people in our lives who walk through adversity. It's not too dissimilar from our dynamic duo of today. It's something that they would have a shared adversity together that would forever bind these two together as they walked through the worst possible moment of their lives. Most of the time when we read through the book of Ruth, we get caught up in the relationship of Ruth and Boaz. I've even heard the book of Ruth referred to as the most romantic book of the Bible. And while that is somewhat true, there are certainly some heavy romantic elements to this particular book. We don't look at the real relationship that this book is built on. We get so focused on the story of Ruth and Boaz that we don't really we don't really look at the dynamic duo that's really at place in the book of Ruth. Ruth would certainly find her way to Boaz, and they would have a relationship that would actually play an effect. If you look at the genealogy of the Bible, it would play an effect all the way to Jesus himself. That were it not for Ruth and Boaz, Jesus would not be in that family lineage. But before Ruth could find her Boaz, she would have to walk through adversity with Naomi. I think an argument could be made that Ruth and Naomi are more the focal point of than Boaz. But if you got your Bible or you got an app on your phone, open it up to Ruth chapter 1 as we examine today's particular dynamic duo. The opening verse of Ruth gives us a backdrop as to where we are in the world, and really it kind of gives us why we're there, because that's an important element for us to keep in mind. Verse 1 says, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons." Now, famines are never a good thing, right? I don't think any of us hears famine and goes, yay! Right? Famine usually means a lack of food. I don't know about you. I hate when there's no food. Clearly. I've never known a famine in my life. But famines are a terrible thing. And oftentimes whenever there is a famine in the land, you would see people travel around trying to find some place where they could hopefully find food. And so as this book opens up, there is a famine in the land of Israel. And so a guy who we learn in verse 2 is named Elimelech, which is just a great name, right? You should name your cat Elimelech. But also don't buy a cat. Cats are evil. But Elimelech is a great name, and Elimelech is a person who lives in Bethlehem but travels from Bethlehem to Moab in the hopes of finding food for sons. But don't get too attached to Elimelech, because verse 3 tells us that after they move to there, Elimelech dies, leaving his wife Naomi and their 2 sons. And as if that wasn't hard enough for Naomi, we find out in verse 5 that both of her sons also die while in Moab, but fortunately not before getting married. Now, I think it's important that we really take a look at this particular moment in a cultural lens, if we could, for just a second, please. It is tremendously painful for anyone to lose somebody close to them, particularly a spouse, somebody who you have pledged to be with your entire life. Some of you in this room know exactly what that pain feels like. And Naomi has had to experience that pain of losing her beloved husband who she had spent all this time with. But in this culture that this book takes place in, it's somehow even made a little bit worse. Because oftentimes for women in this particular day and age, prospects weren't exactly great. The likelihood of a woman being able to find a job outside of the house was next to none. Oftentimes you were reduced to 3 different options. You could either become somebody's housekeeper, hoping that they had enough money to support you. You could beg on the streets. Or more often than not, you fell into prostitution, simply as a means of survival. And now, just a few verses into this book, we learn of 3 different women who are walking through this painful hardship because they have just lost their spouse, they've lost their partner in life, but they've also lost their means of support. Typically, for most, in Naomi's case, it would be the son's responsibility to kind of make sure that his mom is taken care of, but by losing both of her children, she is now left completely on her own. For her daughters-in-law, things could get better. They're young enough that maybe, just maybe, somebody might be willing to marry them again. They can still produce children, and in this day and age, that was really all you focused on. Most of the time, marriages took place simply for means of procreation or advancement in life. The idea of marrying for love is a relatively recent development in the history of the world. And so maybe somebody would take compassion on these two young women and marry them in the hopes of being able to start their family with them. But for Naomi, while the text does not tell us exactly how old she is, we're given the inclination that she is past the age of childbearing. And so in all likelihood, not a lot of dudes are going to give her a shot. So her despair is even greater. It's what Naomi does. She tells her two daughters-in-law in verses 8 and 9, it says, "But Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, 'Go, return each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband.' And then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept." See, Naomi is not only dealing with the idea of being an elderly widow and not having that means of support behind herself, she's also in a land that is not hers. She has no family connection. She has nobody that she could turn to in the hopes that maybe they would show some kindness to her. And so she makes the difficult decision of, I'm going to go back to Bethlehem. I'm going to go home. And maybe, just maybe, somebody there will help take care of it. I can't do anything about being a childless widow, but I can at least do something about my location. For her two daughters-in-law, that this is going to be a difficult thing for them because they are going to be strangers in a land and they're going to be widows. And as tough as it is for widows in this culture, it's even tougher when you're a widow in a foreign land. And so rather than having them come with her, she sets them free, telling them, go back home. Maybe you'll find a husband there. Maybe you'll be able to have your blessing as you need it. But I'm going to go home and I'm going to be miserable. And so we kind of get this, really alerts us to the idea that something different is going to take place. That the story isn't going to end with Naomi going home and being bitter for the rest of her life. It says, then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. One of her daughter-in-laws, Orpah, does exactly as she's told. She leaves her mother-in-law and heads back home. I've been wrestling with this question, and I don't know why it popped in my brain, but it refuses to leave as I've been studying for this particular sermon. Given how we know the rest of the story goes for Ruth and Naomi, was Orpah wrong to leave? It's been bugging me all week. It doesn't really have anything else to do with what we're going to do because I don't think we're ever going to know an answer to it. I'm inclined to think that she just did what she thought was best in the moment, and that's really all any of us can do. But Ruth to her mother-in-law. She refuses to go. And as Naomi is doing everything that she can to get rid of this young lady, to let her go and live her life and hopefully find her happiness and find her fulfillment in this, Ruth tells her what are maybe the most famous verses in the entire book of Ruth. It says in verses 16 and 17, but Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. Understand this particular wrinkle in the story here. Ruth is refusing to leave Naomi. Both of them have just walked through the hardest thing they possibly can. And Naomi recognizes that her prospects are darker than Ruth's. I'm inclined to believe that Ruth probably believed the same. But rather than abandoning her, Ruth begs to stay with Naomi, to continue to walk through this difficult path with her. Ruth's life is not going to get a lot easier when they get to Israel. Israel, particularly in the Old Testament, was not exactly known for welcoming foreigners with open arms, let alone foreign widows. Women did not hold a high position in society at all. Widowed women, even lower. Widowed foreign women, even lower than that. Think back to the woman at the well with Jesus, who's absolutely shocked that as a Samaritan woman, Jesus speaks to her. Because in Jewish society, a foreign woman is a little bit lower than the household dog. So the idea that Ruth is refusing to leave Naomi, this has huge ramifications for Ruth's life. It means that she is going to willingly walk through a lot of difficulty, adversity, a lot of crooked looks from other people, harsh things being said about her behind her back, but she refuses to leave anyway because she cares about Naomi and she's not going to leave her alone. Naomi and Ruth refuses to leave her. We have the benefit of reading this narrative in hindsight. Most of us in this room have at least some idea as to what takes place. We know how the story plays out. And I know that we say this a lot. I know you've heard me say this before. You're going to hear me say it again. I promise you. These were real people walking through this moment. Had no idea what was going to happen to her. She had no idea about a man named Boaz. She had no clue that he would be a family redeemer. She had no idea that he would even be interested in marrying her. She's not going to Bethlehem for Boaz. She's going because she doesn't want to leave Naomi in her despair. When they get to Bethlehem, Naomi tells her entire family exactly how deep that despair actually is. And I think it gives us a window as to why Ruth would not leave her. We see in verses 20 and 21, she said to them, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara." This hurts. "For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full. The Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought down calamity upon me?" That is a person in despair. That is beyond grief, is it not? I mean, all of us, when we walk through difficulty, we feel that weight, that maybe God has left us, that maybe God doesn't want anything to do with us, or that maybe God is just being silent towards us. Naomi has felt that so much so that she is identifying herself in that grief. And yet Ruth refuses to leave her. I can't imagine Naomi was a whole lot of fun to hang around with during this time in her life. And yet Ruth refused to leave. It is so easy for us to stay around each other when things are going well. I don't know about you, I've never had a hard time hanging out with somebody who was going through a great time in their life. Right? Typically happy people make other people happy. Don't they? It's easy to walk through somebody to walk with somebody when everything is going great. But when life slaps them across the face, it becomes a little harder, doesn't it? It takes effort. It takes work. It takes endurance to walk beside somebody who is going through grief and going through despair. I have been fortunate enough in my life to have had several friends who have walked beside me through some pretty dark times in my life. I genuinely believe that that's why I'm still standing here today. Without them, I'm not so sure. Without the people who've cared about me and walked beside me when I wasn't a whole lot of fun to be around. So I thank God for them. You probably have people in your own life who've walked beside you, gotten a little darker, who've been willing to deal and stay beside, leave you when you weren't a whole lot of fun to be around. There is something significant about coming alongside of each other, and we created with a need for each other. And oftentimes we need people most when life just isn't going great. Whether she would admit it or not, Naomi needed Ruth. She did. As we read on a little bit further, Ruth would go on from here to be the one to make sure that Naomi had food, going out into the fields and collecting whatever was left to make sure that the two of them would have something to eat. She would make sure that Naomi was taken care of, that she was provided for, that her needs were met, and she would make sure that Naomi knew that she was loved. Ruth refused to leave Naomi in the midst of her despair, and it would eventually, not right away, it never goes away, but Ruth would be with Naomi to the point where eventually Naomi was restored. When Ruth and Boaz had their first child, we're told in Ruth 16, then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. And may his name be renowned in Israel. Be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who is more to you than 7 sons." I love that. I love that. Has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his knee alone in her grief. Ruth refused to leave her side, even though it was a tremendous personal sacrifice on her behalf. When Naomi told her family that she was left empty, Ruth made sure that she was cared for, that she was loved. When Naomi had no hope, Ruth put that hope in her lap. You cannot tell me that their bond was not strengthened by Ruth walking alongside Naomi. I am convinced that one of the most significant ways that you and I can show the love of God to the people that are around us is to care for them when life has beaten everything out of them. How do we do that? Right? That's always the question we ask whenever we see somebody in pain. How do I help? Just be there. We tend to overcomplicate things. We feel like we have to say or do something. I don't know, like every funeral I've ever been to in my life is and greet the grieving family. I always have the same thought that you have. What am I supposed to say? A very older, wiser man than myself shared this with me once. I'll share it with you. Who cares? They're not going to remember it anyway. What they will remember is that you were there. That you were the lowest moment. That you were there with them when life had beaten the snot out of them. That you were one of the people who was willing to help pick them back up. So what do? Just be there. Who cares? It doesn't matter. There's an ancient tradition in Jewish culture. It's called the sitting Shiva. And here's how it goes. Basically, if a member of the community faces a tremendous loss, if they are in grief, if they are going through a struggle right there, then the people of that community will come immediately to that person who is grieving and just sit with them for 7 days. It is often expected that the people who come for the sitting Shiva don't say a word unless the person who is grieving speaks first. But it is a tremendous comfort to remind that person that they are not alone. That these people are going to walk beside them, that they're going to be with them throughout this entire grieving process. Because oftentimes grief and despair are the times where we feel the most isolated. We feel the most alone. So what better ministry could we as the church, better ministry could we possibly give than the ministry of presence? just being there, refusing to leave when they're walking through their despair. There is something so significant about showing people that I'm going to walk through this with you, because it brings about a level of comfort that otherwise cannot be. If you want to be the hands and feet of Jesus Christ, to show them the love that he has for them, to show them the love that would lead him to die on the cross on their behalf, if you want to show that in a very tangible way, then one of the most significant ways that we can do that is to simply walk alongside those who are grieving. And I'm not just talking about the grief of losing a loved one. Yes, that is a heavy grief, but what about the grief of losing your job? What about the grief of a bad diagnosis? What about the 1,000 other ways that life likes to grieve us? When you know somebody who is walking through that kind of pain, when you know somebody who's walking through that sense of despair, the best thing that you can do is just remind them that they're not alone. The Apostle Paul would write in Romans chapter 12, verse 15, and we will close with it. He said, "Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep."